The heavy wooden door of the little chapel creaked open just after midnight, and Xander Crawford froze in the doorway, his hand still on the iron handle as he stared at the slender figure kneeling before the rough-hewn altar. She was bent forward with her hands clasped so tightly that even in the dim candlelight he could see her knuckles had gone white, and her whispered prayers reached his ears like the desperate plea of someone who had nowhere else to turn. He had come to St. Louis, Missouri in the summer of 1878 only to resupply before heading back into the mountains where he belonged, where civilization was measured in miles between neighbors rather than feet, where a man could breathe without choking on the dust of progress. The town had grown since his last visit, 2 years prior, swelling with ambitious merchants and railroad workers and families seeking their fortunes in the expanding West. Xander had never been comfortable among so many people, preferring the company of pine trees and mountain streams to the false pleasantries of townsfolk who looked at him like he was some kind of wild animal that had wandered in from the wilderness, which, he supposed, was not entirely inaccurate. At 32 years old, he stood well over 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk down a mountainside, which he had done more than once. His arms were thick with muscle earned through years of swinging axes and hauling timber, and his chest was solid as the granite cliffs he scaled. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, usually tied back with a strip of leather when he was working, and his face was weathered from wind and sun but still handsome in a rugged way that made the saloon girls giggle when he passed. He kept a thick beard that he trimmed occasionally with his hunting knife, more out of practicality than vanity. The woman in the chapel had not heard him enter. She continued praying, her voice breaking on words he could not quite make out. Xander knew he should leave, that he was intruding on a private moment, but something kept his boots planted on the worn floorboards. Perhaps it was the raw desperation in her voice, or perhaps it was the way her thin shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. He had heard animals make sounds like that when they were caught in traps, and the comparison made his chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her but needing to announce his presence. She gasped and spun around, scrambling to her feet so quickly that she nearly tripped over her own skirts. In the flickering candlelight, Xander got his first good look at her face, and something in his chest lurched sideways. She was beautiful in the way wildflowers were beautiful, delicate and unexpected, and somehow all the more precious for existing in harsh conditions. Her hair was the color of honey in sunlight, pinned up in a style that had probably been neat hours ago, but now had several strands escaping to frame her face. Her eyes were wide and blue as a mountain lake, currently filled with alarm and the remnants of tears. She looked to be in her early 20s, though the exhaustion evident in the lines around her eyes made it difficult to tell. Her dress was well made but travel-worn, the kind of outfit a respectable young woman might wear on a long journey. "I apologize," Xander said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He was not accustomed to speaking much, and his words always seemed too loud after days of silence in the mountains. "I did not mean to disturb you. I will leave." "No, wait," she said quickly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should not be here this late anyway. I just needed somewhere to think, somewhere to pray. I have been walking for hours and this was the only place still open." Xander frowned, taking in her appearance more carefully now. Her shoes were caked with dust, and he could see the hem of her dress was dirty and torn in places. "You have been walking alone, at night." A flash of something defensive crossed her face. "I had nowhere else to go." "That is dangerous, miss. There are men in this town who would take advantage of a woman alone after dark." "I am well aware of what men are capable of," she said, and the bitterness in her voice told him there was a story behind those words. "But I had no choice. I cannot go back there." Xander stepped fully into the chapel and closed the door behind him, moving slowly so as not to frighten her further. Up close, he could see she was trembling, though whether from cold or fear or something else, he could not tell. Back where? She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as if calculating whether she could make it past him if needed. Xander deliberately moved away from the exit, positioning himself near one of the rough wooden pews to give her space. After a moment, her shoulders sagged. "The boarding house on Maple Street," she said quietly. "I have been staying there since I arrived in St. Louis 3 weeks ago. I came here looking for work, but everything I have tried has fallen through. I ran out of money 2 days ago, and the landlady said if I could not pay by tonight, I would need to leave. She suggested I might earn enough at one of the saloons if I was willing to be friendly to the customers." Her voice cracked on the last words, and she looked down at her hands. "I am not that desperate yet. I would rather sleep in the streets than sell myself that way, so I left. I have been walking ever since, trying to figure out what to do. I ended up here because I did not know where else to go. I thought perhaps if I prayed hard enough, God would send me an answer." Xander felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, a protective instinct that went beyond simple human decency. This woman was lost and alone, pushed to the edge of desperation through no apparent fault of her own. He knew that feeling, though his own circumstances had been different. After his parents died when he was 19, he had struck out for the mountains to escape the suffocating expectations of civilized society. Out there, he had found peace and purpose, but he remembered what it felt like to have nowhere to turn. "What is your name?" he asked. She looked up at him, wariness still evident in her eyes. "Penelope Kane. Most people call me Penny." "I am Xander Crawford. I live up in the mountains about 40 miles north of here, but I come down a few times a year for supplies." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I have a cabin. Nothing fancy, but it is solid and warm, and there is always food. You are welcome to come with me until you figure out what you want to do next." Penny's eyes widened. "I could not possibly. I do not even know you. You could be a murderer or worse." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Xander felt his lips twitch. "If I were a murderer, I would not be much good at it. You would be the first person I have killed, and I am 32 years old." She did not smile. "How do I know you are telling the truth?" "You do not," he admitted. "But I am offering you a choice, which is more than that landlady gave you. You can come with me, or you can stay here in town and take your chances. But I will tell you this. I have never forced myself on a woman, and I never will. You would have your own space in the cabin, and you could leave whenever you wanted. I would take you back to town or wherever else you wanted to go, no questions asked." Penny studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. Xander stood still and let her look, knowing that his appearance probably did not inspire confidence. He looked exactly like what he was, a mountain man who spent more time with animals than people, rough around the edges and intimidating in size. But he hoped she could see past that to the sincerity in his offer. "Why would you help me?" she asked finally. "What do you get out of it?" Xander considered the question. He could tell her that he believed in helping people in need, or that he was simply being neighborly, but both of those answers felt incomplete. The truth was more complicated. "I do not like seeing people suffer when I can do something about it," he said slowly. "And I suppose I remember what it is like to feel lost. The mountains gave me a place to belong when I had nowhere else. Maybe I can offer you the same, at least for a little while." Penny looked down at her hands again, and Xander could see the internal war playing out across her face. Every instinct probably told her not to trust a strange man, especially one who looked like he had walked out of some wild frontier tale. But what choice did she really have? The streets of St. Louis were not safe for a woman alone, and without money or prospects, her options were limited and grim. "If I come with you," she said carefully, "I would need to earn my keep. I am not a charity case. I can cook and clean and sew. I have some experience with animals, though mostly chickens and goats, nothing large. I could help however you needed." "That is not necessary," Xander said. "You would be a guest." "It is necessary to me," Penny said firmly, and he heard the pride in her voice. "I will not be beholden to anyone, not anymore. If I come with you, it will be as someone contributing, not as a burden." Xander nodded slowly. He could respect that kind of independence, even admire it. "All right. If you want to help around the cabin, I will not stop you. God knows the place could use a woman's touch. I am not much for housekeeping." Penny took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders, and Xander saw the moment she made her decision. "Very well. I will come with you, Xander Crawford, but I want your word as a gentleman that you will honor your promise. No unwanted advances, no expectations beyond what we have discussed." "You have my word," Xander said solemnly. "On my mother's grave." She nodded, then looked down at herself. "I should warn you, I have very little with me. Everything I owned was in my room at the boarding house, and I did not dare go back for it after the landlady made her suggestions. Just the clothes on my back and a few coins in my pocket." "We can get you what you need," Xander said. "There are a few shops that will be open tomorrow morning before we leave. I have enough money for supplies." "I cannot ask you to spend money on me," Penny protested. "You are not asking. I am offering. Besides, you will need proper clothes for mountain living. Those fancy skirts will not do you any good on rocky trails." He gestured toward her torn dress. "Can you ride a horse?" "I have ridden before, though not recently." "Good. That will make the journey easier. My horse is strong enough to carry both of us for short stretches, but I will need to purchase another one for you if you are coming along." Xander frowned, calculating costs in his head. The supplies he needed would already set him back a fair amount, and adding another horse plus clothing for Penny would strain his funds. But he had a good supply of furs stored at the cabin that he could bring to town on his next trip, and the money from those would more than cover the expense. Penny was watching him with an unreadable expression. "You are very kind to do this for a stranger." Xander shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Any decent person would do the same." "You would be surprised how few decent people there are in the world," Penny said quietly, and again, Xander heard the weight of experience behind her words. He wanted to ask what had happened to her, what had driven her to St. Louis in the first place, and left her so cynical about human nature. But those were questions for later, if she ever felt comfortable enough to share. For now, the important thing was getting her somewhere safe. "You have anywhere to stay tonight?" he asked. "I have a room at the boarding house on 3rd Street. It is not much, but the landlady is respectable and will not bother you. I could see if she has another room available." Penny shook her head. "I have no money to pay for it. I will cover it." "Xander, I cannot keep accepting charity from you." "It is not charity if you are going to work it off at the cabin, remember," Xander pointed out. "Consider it an advance on your wages." Penny looked like she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was clearly winning out over pride. "Just for tonight," she said finally. "Tomorrow I start earning my keep." "Tomorrow we start the journey to the mountains," Xander corrected. "It will take us most of the day. You can start earning your keep once we arrive." They left the chapel together, stepping out into the cool night air. St. Louis was quiet at this hour, with most of the respectable citizens asleep in their beds, and only the saloons still showing signs of life. Xander kept a careful eye on their surroundings as they walked, positioning himself between Penny and the darker shadows where danger might lurk. She seemed to notice, glancing up at him with something like gratitude in her eyes. The boarding house on 3rd Street was a modest 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who had always been fair in her dealings with Xander. She answered his knock quickly, her gray hair tucked under a nightcap and a wrapper pulled over her nightgown. "Mr. Crawford," she said, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "I apologize for the late hour, Mrs. Fletcher. I was wondering if you might have another room available for tonight. This is Miss Kane, and she is in need of a safe place to sleep." Mrs. Fletcher's sharp eyes took in Penny's disheveled appearance, and her expression softened with understanding. "Come in, child. Yes, I have a room available. Let me get you settled." Xander paid for both rooms, ignoring Penny's protests, and waited while Mrs. Fletcher led her upstairs. When the older woman returned, she fixed him with a knowing look. "That girl has been through something," she said bluntly. "I have seen that look before. You be careful with her, Mr. Crawford. She is fragile whether she wants to admit it or not." "I will treat her with the respect she deserves," Xander said. "She is coming with me to my cabin tomorrow. She needs a fresh start, somewhere away from the city." Mrs. Fletcher nodded approvingly. "You are a good man. There are not many who would help a stranger in need like this. Your mother would be proud." Xander felt his throat tighten at the mention of his mother. She had died 15 years ago, but he still missed her wisdom and gentle strength. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. We will be leaving early tomorrow, so if you do not see us at breakfast, that is why." He retired to his own room, but sleep was slow in coming. He kept thinking about Penny kneeling in that chapel, her voice breaking on desperate prayers. Something about her had reached past all the walls he had built around his heart, touching a part of him he had thought long dormant. He told himself it was simple compassion, the same he would feel for any creature in distress. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, he could not quite convince himself that was the whole truth. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for traveling. Xander rose early and packed his few belongings, then went to check on Penny. She was already awake, wearing the same dress as the night before but looking more rested. Her hair was neatly pinned up, and she had washed her face, though he could still see the lingering effects of stress and exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "A real bed and a locked door work wonders." They ate a quick breakfast of eggs and toast that Mrs. Fletcher insisted on preparing, then set out for the shops. Xander purchased sturdy canvas pants, cotton shirts, a warm jacket and practical boots for Penny, as well as the supplies he needed for the cabin. She tried on the clothes in a back room of the general store, emerging looking uncomfortable but practical in her new attire. "I feel strange wearing trousers," she said, tugging at the waistband. "You will appreciate them on horseback," Xander assured her. "And in the mountains, practicality matters more than propriety." At the livery stable, he selected a gentle mare with calm eyes and a steady temperament. The horse dealer, a grizzled old man named Joe who had known Xander for years, raised an eyebrow at the purchase of a second horse but said nothing beyond wishing them safe travels. By mid-morning, they were ready to leave. Xander helped Penny mount her new horse, showing her how to hold the reins and position her feet in the stirrups. She was clearly rusty but managed well enough, and he was satisfied that she would be able to handle the journey. As they rode out of St. Louis, Penny kept glancing back at the town as if she could not quite believe she was leaving. Xander understood the feeling. Every time he returned to the mountains, he felt the same sense of liberation, like he was shrugging off the weight of civilization and returning to where he truly belonged. The journey north took them through rolling hills and thick forests, following trails that grew progressively narrower and less traveled as they left the settled areas behind. Xander set a steady pace, stopping occasionally to let the horses rest and to check that Penny was managing all right. She proved to be tougher than her delicate appearance suggested, never complaining even when he could see her shifting uncomfortably in the saddle. They talked as they rode, sharing bits of their histories. Penny told him she had grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. Her mother had died when she was 16, and her father had remarried 2 years later. The new wife had not taken kindly to having a grown stepdaughter in the house, and when Penny turned 21, her father had gently suggested it might be time for her to make her own way in the world. "He gave me some money and his blessing," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Said I was smart and capable and would do well for myself. So I decided to head west, where I heard there were opportunities for women willing to work hard. I tried teaching in a small town in Illinois, but the school board decided they preferred a male teacher. Then I worked in a dress shop in Kansas City, but the owner's wife accused me of flirting with her husband, which was absolutely untrue. After that, I came to St. Louis, thinking a bigger city would have more options. But everywhere I went, doors seemed to close in my face." "That is not right," Xander said gruffly. "You should be able to earn an honest living without all that nonsense." "Should and reality are two different things," Penny said with a sad smile. "The world is not kind to women without male protection or family connections." Xander grunted, unable to argue with that truth. He had seen it often enough in his own observations of society, one of the many reasons he preferred the mountains. Out here, your value was determined by your skills and your character, not your gender or your connections. He shared his own story as they rode, telling her about growing up in a small town in Kentucky, how his father had been a blacksmith and his mother had taken in laundry to make extra money. They had not been wealthy, but they had been happy. Then a fever had swept through the town when Xander was 19, taking both his parents within a week of each other. "I could have stayed and taken over my father's smithy," he said. "But I could not bear to be in that town anymore, seeing familiar faces and being reminded of everything I had lost. So I sold the business, packed what I could carry, and headed for the mountains. I had always loved the wilderness, even as a boy. My father used to take me hunting, and those trips were the happiest times of my childhood, so I decided to make that my life." "Do you ever regret it?" Penny asked. Leaving civilization behind, Xander considered the question. "Sometimes I wonder what my life might have been like if I had stayed. Maybe I would have married, had children, been a respected member of the community. But I do not think I would have been happy. The mountains give me something I could never find in a town: freedom, peace, a sense of purpose. Out here, I am exactly who I am supposed to be." Penny was quiet for a moment, then said, "I envy that. I have never felt like I belonged anywhere." "Maybe you will find it in the mountains," Xander said, and was surprised to realize he hoped she would. The thought of her leaving, of her being just a temporary presence in his life, created an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the terrain grew steeper and the air cooler. Penny shivered despite her jacket, and Xander made the decision to stop for the night rather than push on. He found a sheltered spot beneath a rocky overhang and quickly set up a simple camp, building a fire and laying out bedrolls. Penny watched him work with obvious fascination. "You make it look so easy." "Practice," Xander said, arranging stones around the fire pit. "You will learn quickly enough. Out here, you have to be self-sufficient." He cooked a simple meal of beans and salted pork, apologizing for the basic fare. Penny ate hungrily, clearly too hungry to care about the lack of refinement. After dinner, they sat by the fire, watching sparks drift up into the darkening sky. "Thank you," Penny said quietly, "for everything. I know I have said it before, but I want you to know how much it means to me. You saved me from a very dark path." "You would have found another way," Xander said. "You are stronger than you think." "I do not feel very strong. Strength is not about never being afraid or never struggling. It is about keeping going even when things are hard. You did that. You kept looking for solutions instead of giving up." Penny looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You are not what I expected when I first saw you in that chapel. You looked so intimidating, all muscle and wild hair, but you are actually very kind." Xander felt heat rise to his face and was grateful for the darkness that hid his reaction. "I am just a man trying to do right by people when I can." "That is more than most people manage," Penny said softly. They fell into a comfortable silence, and eventually Xander suggested they get some sleep. He gave Penny the better bedroll and positioned himself between her and the outer darkness, a protective barrier against whatever might lurk in the night. As he lay there listening to her breathing slow and deepen, he found himself thinking about what it would be like to have her at the cabin permanently, not just as a temporary guest, but as a real presence in his life. The thought should have alarmed him. He had lived alone for 13 years, content with his solitude and his simple routines. But somehow, the idea of sharing that life with Penny did not feel intrusive. Instead, it felt right in a way he could not quite explain. He pushed the thoughts away and forced himself to sleep. There would be time enough to examine these unfamiliar feelings later. They reached the cabin the next afternoon after several more hours of riding. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, built from logs Xander had cut and notched himself. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and a small vegetable garden grew on the sunny side, evidence of Xander's occasional attempts at farming. Behind the cabin was a sturdy shed for the horses and a smokehouse for preserving meat. Penny dismounted and stood looking at it all with wide eyes. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it," Xander said, feeling an unexpected flush of pride at her obvious admiration. "The main cabin took me a full summer, but I have added to it over the years. It is not fancy, but it is solid." He helped her inside, watching her face as she took in the interior. The main room served as both living space and kitchen, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs in the center. Shelves lined the walls, holding dishes, tools, and supplies. In one corner was Xander's bed, a simple frame with a thick mattress stuffed with pine needles and covered with furs. A ladder led up to a small loft that he used primarily for storage. "I will clean out the loft for you," Xander said. "It will give you some privacy. I can make a proper bed up there and partition it off with some canvas." "I do not want to displace you," Penny protested. "You are not. I have been meaning to make better use of that space anyway." Xander set down the packs they had carried in. "Why do not you rest while I take care of the horses? We can discuss how to divide up the work once you have settled in." Penny nodded gratefully and sank into one of the chairs, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Xander left her there and went to tend to the animals, giving her space to absorb her new surroundings. As he brushed down the horses and settled them in the shed with feed and water, Xander found his mind drifting to the woman now sitting in his cabin. She had already changed his carefully ordered life in ways he was only beginning to understand. The cabin that had always seemed perfectly adequate now felt too rough, too masculine. He found himself noticing things he had never cared about before, like the layer of dust on the shelves, or the way his clothes were piled haphazardly in a corner rather than properly stored. More than that, he was aware of a tension that had not existed before, a heightened consciousness of another person sharing his space. He could picture her sitting at his table, imagine the sound of her voice filling the silence he had grown so accustomed to. The thought made something in his chest tighten, a feeling that was not entirely comfortable but not unwelcome either. When he returned to the cabin, he found Penny examining the shelves with interest. She looked up as he entered, and he was struck again by how beautiful she was, even travel-worn and dressed in practical clothes that did not fit quite right. "You have quite a collection of books," she said, gesturing to a shelf where he kept his small library. "I would not have expected that." "Just because I live in the mountains does not mean I am illiterate," Xander said, more sharply than he intended. He immediately regretted his tone when he saw her flinch. "I apologize. I am defensive about people's assumptions. Yes, I like to read. It helps pass the long winter evenings." Penny smiled tentatively. "I was not judging. I was pleased. I love to read as well, and I was worried I would be bored out here with nothing to occupy my mind." "You can read any of them you like," Xander offered. "And if you tell me what kinds of books you enjoy, I can bring some back from town on my next trip." "That would be lovely. Thank you." They spent the rest of the afternoon getting Penny settled. Xander cleared out the loft, hauling down crates of old supplies and tools to make space. He constructed a simple bed frame and filled a mattress with fresh pine needles and soft moss, covering it with spare blankets and furs. He rigged up a canvas curtain that could be drawn for privacy and built a small shelf for her few possessions. Penny insisted on helping despite her obvious fatigue, organizing the main room and sweeping away cobwebs. She worked efficiently, and Xander could see she had been telling the truth about her domestic skills. By evening, the cabin looked better than it had in years, and the loft had been transformed into a cozy sleeping space. "This is wonderful," Penny said, surveying her new room with obvious pleasure. "I have not had a space of my own since I left my father's house." "Thank you for going to so much trouble." "It was no trouble," Xander said gruffly. "You deserve a proper place to sleep." He cooked dinner, a stew made from dried venison and vegetables from his garden, and they ate together at the table. It felt strange to sit across from someone else, to have conversation with his meals instead of silence. But it was a pleasant strange, Xander realized. He had not understood how lonely he had been until he had company to contrast it with. After dinner, Penny insisted on washing the dishes while Xander checked his traps and made sure the cabin was secure for the night. When he returned, he found her sitting by the fire, one of his books open in her lap. The firelight painted her face in warm tones, and her hair had come partially loose from its pins, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked up as he entered, and their eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Xander felt that strange tension again, stronger now. There was something building between them, something he could not name but could feel in the quickening of his pulse and the way his breath caught when she smiled at him. "The fire is nice," Penny said, breaking the silence. "In St. Louis, I had to share a room with 2 other women at the boarding house, and we could never afford enough coal to keep warm. This feels luxurious by comparison." Xander sat down in his chair, maintaining a respectful distance. "Winters up here can be harsh, but with a good fire and proper preparation, you stay comfortable enough." "Will I be here through winter?" Penny asked, and there was something in her voice he could not quite identify. "That is up to you," Xander said carefully. "You can stay as long as you like, or you can leave whenever you want. I meant what I said about that." Penny was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the book in her lap. "I have nowhere else to go," she said finally. "No family who wants me, no prospects waiting elsewhere." If you are truly willing to let me stay, I would like to remain here at least for a while, until I figure out what I want to do with my life." "You are welcome to stay," Xander said, and meant it with every fiber of his being, "for as long as you need." She smiled at him then, a real smile that reached her eyes, and Xander felt something shift in his chest. He was in dangerous territory, he realized. He barely knew this woman, but already she was affecting him in ways no one had in years. He needed to be careful, to guard his heart against expectations that might not be fair to either of them. But as he watched her return to her reading, her face peaceful in the firelight, he knew it was already too late for caution. She had walked into his life less than 48 hours ago, and already he could not imagine it without her. The days that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Penny proved to be as capable as she had claimed, taking over the cooking and cleaning with an efficiency that freed Xander to focus on his work. She tended the garden, expanding it and adding new vegetables from seeds she found in his supplies. She mended his clothes, which had accumulated an embarrassing number of tears and missing buttons. She even helped with some of the heavier tasks, surprising him with her willingness to get her hands dirty. But more than her practical contributions, she brought life to the cabin. She hummed while she worked, filling the silence with melodies Xander half remembered from his childhood. She asked questions about everything, curious about his life and the wilderness around them. She laughed easily, and the sound of it made something in his chest feel lighter. Xander found himself looking forward to the end of each day, when his work was done, and they would sit together by the fire. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and opinions and dreams. He learned that she loved poetry but hated mathematics, that she had a gift for drawing but had never had the time or materials to pursue it seriously. She was smart and funny and kind, with a core of strength that had been tempered by hardship but not broken by it. He also learned, slowly and in pieces, about what had driven her to that chapel in St. Louis. Her stepmother had not just been unkind, she had been cruel, criticizing everything Penny did and turning her father against her. Her father, weakened by grief and loneliness, had chosen his new wife over his daughter, believing the lies he was told. Penny had left not because she wanted to, but because staying had become unbearable. "I thought if I could just prove myself, if I could make it on my own, he would see that she was wrong about me," Penny said one evening, staring into the fire. "But every time I tried, something went wrong. It felt like the universe was conspiring against me. I started to wonder if maybe my stepmother was right, if maybe I was just useless and incapable." "That is not true," Xander said fiercely. "You are one of the most capable people I have ever met. The fact that other people could not see your worth says nothing about you and everything about them." Penny looked at him with shining eyes. "You really believe that? I know it. I see it every day in the way you handle everything thrown at you. You have strength most people will never have." She reached out then and took his hand, squeezing it gently. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and Xander felt the touch like electricity through his whole body. Her hand was small and delicate in his work-roughened palm, but her grip was firm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me. For giving me a chance when no one else would." Xander looked down at their joined hands, his heart pounding. He wanted to tell her that it was more than belief, that she had become important to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. But he held back, afraid of moving too fast and scaring her away. She had been through so much, and the last thing she needed was pressure from him. So instead he just squeezed her hand back and said, "You do not need to thank me. I am glad you are here." As summer deepened into early autumn, Xander became increasingly aware of his growing feelings for Penny. It was not just attraction. though he certainly felt that. Every time he looked at her, he wanted to touch her, to close the distance between them and see if her lips were as soft as they looked. But it was more than physical desire. He found himself thinking about her constantly, worrying about her happiness, planning for a future that included her presence. He caught himself doing things he had never bothered with before, like washing more frequently and making sure his hair was neatly tied back. He started bringing her small gifts from his explorations, interesting rocks or wildflowers or a particularly beautiful feather. Her delight at these offerings made him feel like he could move mountains. Penny, for her part, seemed to be settling into mountain life with remarkable ease. She had lost the haunted look she had worn in St. Louis, and color had returned to her cheeks. She smiled more easily now, and Xander loved being the cause of those smiles. She had also started sketching, using charcoal and blank pages from an old ledger Xander had never used. Her drawings were beautiful, capturing the landscape around them with a skilled hand. One afternoon in early September, Xander returned from checking his trap lines to find Penny sitting outside the cabin, working on a sketch. She looked up as he approached, and the smile she gave him made his heart skip. "You are back early," she said. "The traps were mostly empty. Animals are probably sensing the weather change." Xander sat down beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance even though every instinct screamed at him to close the gap. "What are you drawing?" "The view from here. I want to remember it exactly as it is." She tilted the paper so he could see, and Xander was struck by how perfectly she had captured the scene, the way the mountains rose in the distance and the trees framed the clearing. "That is beautiful. You are very talented." Penny blushed, pleasure evident in her expression. "I am out of practice, but it feels good to be creating something again. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed this." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Penny returning to her sketch while Xander watched the play of light through the trees. It was moments like this that made him realize how much his life had changed in just a few months. He had thought he was content before, but now he understood the difference between contentment and true happiness. "Xander," Penny said suddenly, setting down her charcoal. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Have you ever been in love?" The question caught him off guard. He considered lying or deflecting, but something in her open expression made him choose honesty. "Once, a long time ago, there was a girl in my hometown before my parents died. We had an understanding, nothing formal, but we both knew we would eventually marry. But after my parents passed, I could not stay there. I asked her to come with me, but she refused. She said she could not leave her family and everything she knew for an uncertain life in the wilderness. I understood, even if it hurt. We said goodbye and I never saw her again." "Do you regret it, leaving her behind?" Xander thought about it carefully. "I regret the pain it caused both of us, but I do not regret the choice itself. We would not have been happy together, not really. She needed the structure and security of town life, and I needed the freedom of the mountains. Sometimes love is not enough if you want fundamentally different things." Penny nodded slowly. "I suppose that is true. I always imagined love would be simple, that you would meet someone and just know and everything else would fall into place. But life is more complicated than that, is it not?" "It can be," Xander agreed. "But sometimes it is simple. Sometimes you meet someone and everything does fall into place, because you want the same things and fit together in the ways that matter." Penny looked at him then, really looked at him, and Xander saw something shift in her expression. There was awareness there, a dawning understanding that made his breath catch. "Is that what you think has happened here?" she asked quietly. "With us?" Xander's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. This was the moment, he realized. He could play it safe, pretend he did not understand what she was asking, Or he could be honest, lay his feelings bare and risk everything. He chose honesty. "Yes," he said simply. "I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot deny what I feel. You have become important to me, Penny. More important than I ever expected anyone to be again. I think about you constantly. I want to make you happy, to protect you, to build a life with you. I know I have no right to feel this way so quickly, and I understand if you do not feel the same. But you asked, and I am telling you the truth." Penny's eyes had gone wide as he spoke, and for a terrible moment, Xander thought he had made a horrible mistake. Then she smiled, a radiant expression that seemed to light up her entire face. "I was hoping you would say that," she said softly, "because I feel the same way. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon and that I should not trust these feelings. But every day I spend with you, I become more certain. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in ways I never have before. When I think about leaving here, about going back to the world out there, I cannot imagine it. This is where I want to be, with you." Xander felt like his chest might burst from the joy flooding through him. "You mean that? Every word?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his hand. Her skin was soft beneath his calloused palm, and she leaned into his touch with a small sigh. He stroked his thumb across her cheekbone, marveling at the trust in her eyes. "I want to kiss you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "May I?" In answer, Penny leaned forward and closed the distance between them. Her lips were every bit as soft as he had imagined, and the kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and answer all at once. Xander kept it chaste, not wanting to push too far too fast, but even that simple contact sent heat racing through his veins. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing harder. Penny's cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. "That was nice," she said, then laughed at the inadequacy of the word. "Better than nice. Wonderful. We can do it again if you like," Xander offered, and she laughed harder. "I would very much like that." They kissed again, longer this time, and Xander let himself get lost in the feel of her, the taste of her, the way she fit perfectly against him when he pulled her closer. It was everything he had imagined and more, and when they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of pine and wildflowers that clung to her hair. "I never expected this," he said quietly. "When I saw you in that chapel, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I never imagined you would become everything to me." "God works in mysterious ways," Penny said with a small smile. "I prayed for an answer and he sent me you, the best answer I could have asked for." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. Xander felt like a different person, like he had been living in shades of gray, and Penny had brought color back into his world. As the sun set and they went inside to prepare dinner, Xander found himself thinking about that night in the chapel, how easily things could have gone differently. If he had arrived at a different time, if Penny had chosen a different place to pray, if either of them had made different choices, they might never have met. The thought filled him with profound gratitude for whatever forces had aligned to bring them together. That night, after Penny had retired to the loft and the cabin was quiet, Xander lay in his bed thinking about the future. He had lived alone for so long, convinced that he was meant for solitude. But now he could see that he had just been waiting, preparing a life that would be ready when the right person came along. And Penny was absolutely the right person. She fit into his world as if she had been made for it, bringing her own strengths and perspectives while respecting his need for the wilderness. She understood him in ways no one else ever had, seeing past his rough exterior to the man beneath. He wanted to marry her, he realized. The thought should have terrified him, but instead it filled him with certainty. He wanted to make their arrangement permanent, to tie their lives together in every way that mattered. But it was too soon to propose, he knew that. She needed time to be sure, to understand what she was committing to. A life in the mountains was not easy, and while she had adapted well to a few months, he needed to know she could handle it long-term before asking her to promise forever. So he would wait. He would court her properly, show her every day how much she meant to him, and when the time was right, he would ask her to be his wife. The thought made him smile into the darkness, anticipation already building for the life they would build together. The autumn progressed, and with each passing day, Xander and Penny grew closer. They had fallen into the habit of ending each evening with kisses by the fire, gradually growing bolder in their affection. Xander was always careful to maintain proper boundaries, conscious of Penny's inexperience and the importance of doing things right. But the desire between them was building, a tension that grew more difficult to ignore. One evening in late October, with the first snow beginning to fall outside, Penny came down from the loft wearing one of his old shirts over her nightgown. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and in the firelight, she looked almost ethereal. "I could not sleep," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "The wind is loud tonight." "First winter storm coming through," Xander said. "It will be a big one, I think. We will likely be snowed in for a few days." Penny did not look concerned, just nodded and moved her chair closer to his. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire crackle and listening to the wind howl outside. "Xander," Penny said eventually, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that, about us? About our future together?" She turned to look at him, her blue eyes serious. "I know we have not talked about marriage explicitly, but I assume that is where this is heading. Is that correct?" Xander felt his heart rate pick up. "I would like it to be, but only if that is what you want. I do not want to pressure you into anything." "You are not pressuring me." "I want the same thing. I want to marry you, to build a life with you here in these mountains. But there is something we need to discuss first." "What is it?" Penny took a deep breath. "I have not been completely honest with you about my past. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was ashamed. But if we are going to spend our lives together, you deserve to know the whole truth." Xander reached out and took her hand. "Whatever it is, we will face it together. Nothing you tell me will change how I feel about you." She squeezed his hand gratefully. "When I was in Kansas City, working in that dress shop, the owner's wife accused me of flirting with her husband. I told you that. What I did not tell you was that she was partially right, though not in the way she thought. Her husband did make advances toward me, but I rejected them. He did not take kindly to the rejection and told his wife that I had been the one pursuing him. She believed him, of course, and I was fired and thrown out with no references. But before I left, he cornered me in the storage room and tried to force himself on me." Xander felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. "Did he hurt you?" he tried, but I fought back. I had a pair of scissors in my pocket from work, and I stabbed him in the shoulder. Not deep enough to kill him, but enough to make him let me go. I ran and never looked back. I do not know if he reported me to the authorities or if his pride kept him quiet about being bested by a woman. But I have been looking over my shoulder ever since, afraid that someone would be looking for me." Xander pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "That was not your fault. You did what you had to do to protect yourself." "I know that in my head," Penny said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "But I still feel guilty about it, and I worry that it will come back to haunt us somehow. What if someone finds me? What if there is legal trouble? Then we will deal with it," Xander said firmly. "Together." "You acted in self-defense, and any reasonable person would see that. But even if legal trouble did come, I would protect you. No one will take you away from me, I promise you that. Penny pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. I do not deserve you. You are too good to me. You deserve everything good in this world, Xander said, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. She kissed him then, desperately, and Xander responded in kind. The kiss quickly grew heated, all the pent-up desire and emotion between them finally finding an outlet. Xander's hands tangled in her hair while hers gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Xander rested his forehead against hers, trying to regain control of himself. "Marry me," he said, the words tumbling out before he could think better of them. "I know this is not the most romantic proposal, but I cannot wait any longer. I want you to be my wife, Penny. I want to fall asleep beside you every night and wake up to you every morning. I want to build a future with you, have children if you want them, grow old together in this cabin. Say you will marry me, please." Penny was crying again, but these were happy tears. "Yes. Yes, of course I will marry you. There is nothing I want more." Xander kissed her again, pouring all his love and joy and relief into the contact. When they finally settled back into their chairs, hands still clasped, both of them were grinning like fools. "When?" Penny asked. "When should we get married?" "As soon as possible. But we will have to wait until spring when the trails are passable again. We can ride into town and find a preacher to perform the ceremony." Xander paused, thinking. "Unless you want something bigger, family present, a proper dress." Penny shook her head. "I have no family I care to invite, and the only dress I need is whatever is practical. I just want to be your wife. Nothing else matters." "Then we will marry in the spring," Xander said. "But as far as I am concerned, you are already mine and I am already yours." "I feel the same way." They stayed up late into the night, making plans and talking about their future. Xander told her about the improvements he wanted to make to the cabin, adding a separate bedroom and maybe expanding the garden. Penny talked about wanting to learn to hunt and trap, to be a true partner in the work of survival rather than just managing the domestic tasks. By the time they finally retired to their separate beds, both were exhausted but happy. Xander lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm outside and thinking about how drastically his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been alone and convinced that was how he would always be. Now he was engaged to a woman he loved more than he had thought possible, planning a future that included partnership and love and maybe even children. The universe worked in mysterious ways indeed. Winter settled over the mountains with a vengeance, bringing deep snows and bitter cold. Xander and Penny were snowed in for days at a time, but neither of them minded. The forced proximity only brought them closer, and they spent the long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and enjoying each other's company. Xander taught Penny how to tan hides and maintain their tools, while she taught him how to make bread that did not taste like rocks and how to darn socks properly. They were building a partnership, learning to work together and complement each other's strengths. The physical side of their relationship remained chaste, though the tension continued to build. Xander was determined to wait until they were properly married, both out of respect for Penny and because he wanted to do things right. She seemed to appreciate his restraint, even as she sometimes looked at him with such obvious desire that it took all his self-control not to pull her into his arms and abandon his principles. Christmas came and went quietly. They had no gifts to exchange beyond what they had already given each other, which was companionship and love and the promise of a shared future. But Penny made a special meal, using some of their carefully hoarded supplies to create something approaching a feast, and Xander surprised her with a wooden box he had carved for her art supplies. "This is beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. He had carved her initials into the lid, along with a simple mountain scene. "You made this. During the evenings when you were already asleep. I wanted you to have something special." Penny threw her arms around him, kissing him soundly. "Thank you. It is the best gift anyone has ever given me." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, the snow began to melt and the trails became passable again. Xander and Penny made plans for their trip to town. They would need to make some purchases anyway. Supplies they had run low on over the winter, so they would combine the practical with the momentous. In early April, with the weather finally warm enough for comfortable travel, they set out for St. Louis. It felt strange to Xander to be making this journey with company, to have Penny riding beside him on her mare. She had become an excellent rider over their months together, confident and capable on horseback. As they descended from the mountains toward the settled lands, Penny grew increasingly nervous. "What if we run into someone who recognizes me? What if there is trouble?" "Then we will handle it," Xander said calmly. "But I suspect enough time has passed that no one is looking for you anymore if they ever were. We will get married, purchase what we need, and return home. It will be fine." His confidence seemed to calm her, and by the time they reached the outskirts of St. Louis, she had relaxed somewhat. The town had grown even in the months since Xander's last visit, with new buildings going up and more people crowding the streets. They found a preacher at a small church on the edge of town, a kindly old man who asked no difficult questions and seemed happy to perform the ceremony. Mrs. Fletcher from the boarding house agreed to serve as a witness, along with the preacher's wife. The ceremony itself was simple and quick, but no less meaningful for its brevity. Xander spoke his vows clearly, promising to love and cherish Penny for the rest of his days. Penny's voice trembled slightly as she made her own promises, but her eyes were clear and certain as she looked at him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed his bride with all the love and tenderness he possessed. Penny kissed him back, and when they pulled apart, both of them had tears in their eyes. "I love you," Xander said, the first time he had spoken the words aloud. "I love you too," Penny replied. "So very much." They spent one night at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, paying for the privacy of a separate room. It was their wedding night, and Xander was determined to make it special for Penny. He had no experience with such things beyond his own imagination, but he was gentle and attentive, and Penny responded to his touch with a passion that matched his own. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Xander held his wife close and marveled at the turn his life had taken. Less than a year ago, he had been alone and resigned to that fact. Now he had a wife he adored, and the future stretched out before them bright with possibility. "Are you happy?" he asked Penny, stroking her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "You saved me, Xander. In every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," he said. "I just did not know I needed saving until you came along." They left town the next morning, husband and wife in truth as well as law. The journey back to the cabin felt different now, charged with the knowledge that they were truly beginning their life together. When they finally arrived home, Xander swept Penny up in his arms and carried her over the threshold, making her laugh. "Welcome home, Mrs. Crawford," he said, setting her down gently. "It has a nice ring to it," Penny said, smiling up at him. "I think I will enjoy being Mrs. Crawford." The spring and summer that followed were the happiest months of Xander's life. He and Penny worked together to improve the cabin and expand their little homestead. They planted a larger garden and built a proper chicken coop, filling it with hens purchased from a farmer on their trip to town. Xander taught Penny to shoot and trap, and she proved to be a quick study, bagging her first rabbit by midsummer. They also worked on expanding the cabin itself. Xander built a separate bedroom, giving them proper privacy and allowing the main room to be dedicated to living space. He constructed better furniture, a proper bed frame and a rocking chair and shelves for Penny's growing collection of art supplies. Penny, for her part, transformed the cabin into a real home. She made curtains from fabric they purchased in town, brightening the interior. She planted flowers around the perimeter, adding beauty to the practical. She cooked meals that were not just sustaining but delicious, using herbs she cultivated in a small garden by the door. But more than the physical improvements, what made those months special was the deepening of their emotional connection. They talked about everything, sharing their thoughts and fears and dreams. They made love frequently, exploring each other's bodies and learning what brought pleasure. They laughed together at small mishaps and supported each other through challenges. By early autumn, Penny suspected she might be pregnant. She waited to be certain before telling Xander, not wanting to get his hopes up if she was wrong. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the third time and her body began to show other telltale signs, she knew it was time to share the news. She waited until after dinner one evening, when they were sitting together by the fire as had become their habit. Xander was working on repairing a leather harness and Penny was sketching, though her attention kept drifting to the words she needed to say. "Xander," she said finally, setting down her charcoal, "I have something to tell you." He looked up immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. At least I do not think so. I hope you will think it is good news." She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Xander stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, growing until it seemed to take over his entire being. He set aside the harness and pulled Penny into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Penny, that is the best news you could have given me. You are happy then." "Happy does not even begin to cover it. I am overjoyed, ecstatic. I am going to be a father." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "Are you all right? Do you feel well? Do you need anything?" "Should you be sitting down more?" Penny laughed at his sudden concern. "I am fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not made of glass. Still, you should take it easy. No heavy lifting. I will handle all the difficult tasks from now on." "Xander, I am pregnant, not an invalid. I can still work. But you should rest more and eat more. You are eating for two now." He was already moving toward their food stores as if planning to feed her immediately. Penny caught his hand, pulling him back. "I promise I will take care of myself and our baby. But you need to trust me to know my own limits. I am not going to do anything to put this child at risk." Xander nodded, though she could see it would be a struggle for him not to hover. His protective instincts were already in overdrive, and the baby was not even born yet. Over the following months, Penny's pregnancy progressed normally. She suffered some morning sickness in the early weeks, but it passed, and she actually felt better than she had in years. Her body filled out, curves appearing where there had been only angles before, and her skin glowed with health. Xander was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more and constantly checking to make sure she was comfortable. Penny tolerated his fussing with good humor, understanding that it came from love and the natural anxiety of a first-time father facing the uncertainties of childbirth in the wilderness. As winter approached again, Xander began to worry about the isolation. What if something goes wrong during the birth? There is no doctor nearby, no midwife. We would be completely on our own. Women have been giving birth without doctors for thousands of years, Penny reminded him. My mother did it and her mother before her. I am strong and healthy and I have you. That is enough. But what if it is not? What if you need help I cannot provide? Penny took his face in her hands, making him look at her. Then we will deal with it. But worrying about what might go wrong will not change anything. We have to trust that everything will be all right. Xander tried to take comfort in her confidence, but the fear lingered at the edges of his mind. He had already lost so much in his life. The thought of losing Penny or their child was unbearable. He prepared for the birth as best he could, gathering supplies and information. On his last trip to town before winter set in, he purchased medical supplies and borrowed a book on midwifery from the general store owner's wife. He read it cover to cover multiple times, memorizing the procedures and warning signs. Penny gave birth in early March, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Xander stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her brow and offering what comfort he could. He had never felt so helpless, watching her suffer and being unable to do anything to ease her pain. But when their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs, all the fear and anxiety melted away. Xander cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in clean cloths, then placed him in Penny's arms. "He is perfect," Penny said, tears streaming down her face as she looked at their son. "Look at him, Xander. We made this beautiful person." Xander could not speak past the lump in his throat. He knelt beside the bed, one hand on Penny's shoulder and the other gently touching the baby's tiny hand. When those miniature fingers wrapped around his, he felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "What should we name him?" Penny asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Xander knew exactly what the boy should be called. "Thomas," he said, "after my father, Thomas James Crawford." "Thomas," Penny repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, little one." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and chaotic. Thomas demanded constant attention, crying when he was hungry or wet or simply wanted to be held. Xander and Penny took turns walking him when he was fussy, and both of them were operating on minimal sleep. But despite the challenges, Xander had never been happier. Watching Penny nurse their son, seeing the tender way she cradled him and sang lullabies, made his love for her deepen even further. And holding Thomas, feeling the weight of that tiny life in his arms, gave him a sense of purpose that went beyond anything he had known before. He was a father now, with all the responsibilities that entailed. He had to provide for his family, protect them, teach his son everything he would need to know to survive and thrive. It was daunting, but also incredibly fulfilling. As Thomas grew from a newborn into an infant, his personality began to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. He was curious about everything, always reaching for new things and trying to explore. Penny proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even when exhausted. She handled the demands of caring for an infant while also maintaining the household with impressive efficiency. Xander tried to help as much as he could, taking over the baby care whenever possible so Penny could rest or have time to herself. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. When Thomas was 2, Penny gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. 3 years after that came another son, David. The cabin that had once seemed more than adequate for 2 people was now bursting with life and noise. Xander expanded it further, adding another bedroom for the children and building a larger workspace for his tools and equipment. He also constructed a small schoolhouse where Penny taught the children to read and write and do sums. Education was important to both of them, and they were determined their children would have opportunities they had not. The children thrived in the mountain environment. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, with the same love of the wilderness. By the time he was 10, he was already accompanying Xander on hunting trips and learning to trap. Sarah was more like her mother, gentle and artistic, always drawing or making up stories. David was the most adventurous of the three, constantly getting into mischief and giving his parents heart attacks with his fearless climbing. Xander and Penny's love for each other only deepened over the years. They still made time for each other despite the demands of raising 3 children, stealing moments of intimacy and connection. They had built a life together that was everything Xander had never dared to dream of, full of love and laughter and purpose. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander surprised Penny with a trip just the two of them, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor for a few days. They rode out to a beautiful meadow high in the mountains, a place Xander had discovered years ago but had never shown anyone. They made camp under the stars, and after the children were mentioned and missed, but also enjoyed the rare peace of being alone together, they lay in each other's arms looking up at the night sky. "You ever regret it?" Xander asked. "Coming with me that night? Choosing this life instead of something more conventional?" Penny turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Not for a single moment. This life, with you and our children, is everything I ever wanted even when I did not know what I was looking for. You gave me a home, Xander. Not just a place to live, but a sense of belonging I never had before." "You gave me the same thing," Xander said, pulling her closer. "Before you, I was just surviving. You taught me how to truly live." They made love under the stars, reaffirming their connection and their commitment to each other. And as they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Xander thought back to that night in the chapel, when he had found a desperate woman praying for answers. He had thought he was saving her, offering her a way out of an impossible situation. But the truth was, she had saved him just as much. She had brought love and light into his solitary existence, transforming his simple cabin into a real home filled with warmth and laughter. Penny stirred in her sleep, unconsciously moving closer to him, and Xander tightened his arms around her. Whatever higher power had brought them together, he would be forever grateful. She had been lost, and he had become her answer. But she had also been his answer to questions he had not even known to ask. As the years continued to pass, Xander and Penny watched their children grow into fine young adults. Thomas became a skilled hunter and tracker, eventually building his own cabin a few miles away with a young woman he met during a trip to town. Sarah discovered a talent for healing, learning about medicinal plants and helping neighbors with various ailments. David, the adventurous one, left to see more of the world, promising to return but needing to satisfy his wanderlust first. Xander and Penny grew older together, their hair graying and their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work. But they remained deeply in love, still stealing kisses when they thought no one was watching, still sitting together by the fire each evening to talk and simply be in each other's presence. On a warm summer evening when Xander was 54 and Penny was 43, they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their hands were clasped together as they had been countless times before, and the comfortable silence between them spoke of decades of shared life. "You remember the night we met?" Penny asked, breaking the silence. "Every detail," Xander said. "You were kneeling in that chapel, praying so desperately. I almost left without saying anything. I am grateful you did not. I was at the absolute lowest point of my life that night. I had nowhere to go, no prospects, no hope. And then you appeared, this massive mountain man with kind eyes, offering me a chance I did not deserve." "You deserved every chance and more," Xander said firmly. You just needed someone to see your worth. Penny smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. We have built a good life, have we not? The best life, Xander agreed. Better than I ever imagined possible. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching darkness slowly claim the sky. Inside the cabin, a lamp was lit, casting warm light through the windows. It was the same cabin Xander had built over 30 years ago, though expanded and improved over time. The same mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, but everything else had transformed. I love you, Penny said softly. I know I tell you that often, but I want to make sure you know. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Xander Crawford. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Crawford, Xander replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. My answered prayer, even though I did not know I was praying. As full darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, they finally went inside, hands still clasped. Behind them, the mountains stood silent witness to their love story, a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest blessings come when we least expect them, and that answered prayers can take many forms. The chapel where they had met was long gone now, torn down and replaced by a bank as St. Louis continued to grow and change. But the memory of that night remained crystal clear for both of them. The moment when two lost souls had found each other and everything had changed. Xander had been her answer, the solution to prayers spoken in desperation. But she had also been his answer, filling empty spaces in his life he had not realized existed. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a love that had weathered every challenge and emerged stronger. And as they settled into bed that night, Xander's arms around his wife as they had been for over a decade. Both of them knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next together. Their story had begun in a chapel at midnight with a desperate prayer, and it would continue for as long as they both drew breath. A love story for the ages played out against the backdrop of the wild mountains they both called home. Years later, when Xander was in his 70s and Penny in her 60s, they would still tell their story to anyone who would listen. Their grandchildren would gather around to hear how Grandpa had found Grandma praying in a chapel, how he had offered her a home, and how she had transformed his life. The children would listen with wide eyes, asking questions about the journey to the mountains and those early days of uncertainty and growing love. And Xander and Penny would smile at each other across the room, the same spark visible in their eyes that had been there from the beginning. Because true love does not fade with age, it only deepens, becoming more precious with each passing year. Their story was complete, a circle that had begun with desperate prayer and ended with profound gratitude. Penny had been lost, searching for purpose, and belonging in a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. Xander had been alone, convinced that solitude was his destiny. Together, they had found what they had both been seeking, even when they had not known what that was. In the end, it was a simple story, really. A man and a woman meeting by chance, or perhaps by divine intervention, and choosing to build a life together. But simple does not mean insignificant, and their love had rippled outward, touching their children and grandchildren and everyone who witnessed the depth of their devotion to each other. As Xander held his wife close on cold mountain nights, feeling her heart beat in rhythm with his own, he would sometimes think back to that version of himself who had lived alone for so many years. That man had been content, or so he had believed. But this man, the one who had found love and built a family and created a legacy, this man knew what true happiness was, and it had all started with a midnight prayer and the courage to offer help to a stranger. From such small moments, entire lives could be transformed. From such desperate prayers, miracles could emerge. And from such unlikely beginnings, the greatest love stories could unfold. Their tale would be told and retold through generations, a reminder that hope can be found in the darkest moments, that answered prayers sometimes come in unexpected forms, and that true love can transform even the most solitary heart. It was a story of the Wild West, of mountain life and survival and the strength of the human spirit. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple and absolutely true,